Clearly, the media is captured by pharma. I mean, we changed the rule in 1997 in this country. Prior to 1997, it was illegal for pharmaceutical companies to do direct-to-consumer advertising on television or anywhere. And it's regarded as a bad idea. And virtually every country in the world makes it illegal, except for us and New Zealand. And not coincidentally, we use more pharmaceutical drugs than anybody, 3 times as much as anybody else. We pay the highest prices and we have the worst health outcomes. So the American Medical Association was dead set against it. Everybody sensible said you should not be allowing these companies to advertise. But the impact has been not just on public health, but it has been subversive and corrosive to our democracy, because you have people like Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper who are making these huge salaries, $10 or $12 million a year. And those salaries they're coming from CNN, but they know that the salaries ultimately are paid for by Pfizer and Merck. If you turn on those shows, they announced in the beginning, brought to you by Pfizer. So they're not working for us. They're drug reps. They're not doing their job as journalists. They're not confronting Tony Fauci. They're not allowing alternative narratives. They're not allowing criticism or dissent. They become propaganda vehicles for the pharmaceutical industry and for the government.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Have you heard of the New York Times bestselling book, The Real Anthony Fauci? In it, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. highlights what a lot of Americans are already feeling, that there's something not right about the way Fauci is leading the public health response to our current crisis. This is episode 351, and our guest today is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Kennedy is the head of the Children's Health Defense and a staunch advocate for health and medical freedom. Today, we discuss the most important aspects of his recent book. And it's more than just a feeling that something's not right. Kennedy consistently reveals facts that need to be brought to light. He discusses data that indicates that we're unhealthier now, as the American people, under the leadership of Fauci at NIAID, than we were decades before. He also sheds light on the fact that Fauci has aligned with pharmaceutical companies time and time again at the expense of public health. He points to the unethical experiments Fauci conducted on children in New York. And he reminds us that true science is about asking questions. It's never settled. Before we get into the conversation, I want to remind you that Bobby has vocal dysphonia, a problem with his vocal cords that can make his speech a bit difficult to understand at times. You may have to make a greater effort than usual to listen. I believe it will be worth your while. Also, I just want to say that censorship is real. The Weston A. Price Foundation got their account pulled from Facebook, and on Instagram, the Weston A. Price account is being shadow banned. And podcasts are one of the few places where we can share information unhindered. But there are folks out there right now trying to stop that. So we invite you to do 2 things to keep getting our information and to stay connected with us. One is to join our email list. Just click on the yellow button on our homepage to sign up at westonaprice.org. And download our Wise Traditions podcast app. It's as simple as going to the application store on your smartphone, whether it's an Apple product or an Android, type in Wise Traditions podcast in the search bar and download it. It's free, and this way we can stay connected unhindered. No middleman. And a quick shout out to One Earth Health. You know the benefits of organ meat. But did you know that New Zealand's organ meats are up to 400% more nutrient dense than organ meat from other countries? That means you get a lot more vitamin A, K, and B, along with many other nutrients compared to other sources. And now you can get these nutrients in capsule form from One Earth Health. Their cattle are pasture-raised with no GMOs or pesticides. And their capsules are filler-free, and each bottle comes with 200 capsules. And all One Earth Health products come with a lifetime warranty. So go to oneearthhealth.com and use the code WISE20 to get 20% off and free shipping. This offer is only for a limited time. So again, go to oneearthhealth.com and get 20% off any One Earth Health product using the code WISE20. And hurry, because this offer will not last. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Bobby.
Thanks for having me.
Your book is an eye-opener, and we wanted to have you on the show to talk about it. You know, for decades, Anthony Fauci has been a public servant who is ostensibly working for the public health, but your book uncovers that he is responsible for all kinds of cover-ups of contamination of blood and vaccines, experimenting on children, even the creation of superbugs. This sounds like the stuff of science fiction, but it's not, is it?
No, you look at Tony Fauci's career, and the best way that I can describe it is that he has been the primary architect of agency capture within the public health agencies, not only the U.S. agencies, the key agencies that are subsidiaries of HHS, the CDC, the FDA, NIAID, and NIH, but also partnering with Bill Gates in the global health agencies, WHO, European Medicals Agency, and then these kind of quasi-governmental agencies that he and Gates have created, like CEPI, Gavi, or that they run, like Brighton Collaboration. But basically, the purpose is to create markets and drive large profits to the pharmaceutical industry, the industry that they're supposed to regulate. And the agencies themselves have become sock puppets to the industry that it's supposed to be regulating. And what Tony Fauci does, as I show in the book, is not public health. He does not measure his success by showing healthier Americans. He measures his success by pharmaceutical products sold, by profits to the industry, and predictably, during his 50 years running public health in our country, the health of Americans has gone from the healthiest country in the world to, I think, the 79th now, behind all of the industrial countries in the world. We do not even compete with the other industrial countries in terms of all the major metrics for measuring public health and evaluating public health. We have the sickest generation of children, highest rates of obesity, of chronic disease. When Tony Fauci came in, 6% of our people had chronic disease. These are neurological, neurodevelopmental diseases, autoimmune diseases, allergic diseases. These are the diseases he's supposed to be protecting us against. Today, 54% of American children have those diseases. Use boogeyman of infectious disease to channel Americans into a dependence on pharmaceutical products. We use 3 times the number of pharmaceutical products as the average Western nation. We pay the highest prices. We have the worst health outcomes. And I show is that those results are purposeful.
This is so alarming. And I know what you're talking about because I've read portions of your book. It's a thick tome, so it's a lot to get through. But for example, his career at NIAID, that's what you're referring to, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Under his leadership over decades, our health has declined in terms of these allergies and infectious diseases as opposed to improving, right?
Yeah. We've gone from 6%, as I said, who had chronic disease to 54% today. And his job is to figure out, why is autism gone from 1 in every 10,000 people in my generation today? 1 in 10,000 people who are 67 years old have full-blown autism. I don't mean Asperger's or, somebody's quirky uncle who doesn't have the social skills. I mean full-blown autism, which is nonverbal, non-toilet trained, stimming, screaming, agonizing gut pains, toe walking. You do not see, I have literally never seen anybody my age with those symptoms. In my children's generation, according to the CDC, 1 out of every 34 children have it. Why did that happen? Why did suddenly in 1989, when Congress had the EPA, what year did the autism epidemic begin? EPA scientists came back and said it's a red line. It happened in 1989. What else happened in 1989? We had an explosion of food allergies. So prior to 1989, listen, I have 11 siblings, 70 first cousins. I didn't know anybody with a peanut allergy. Why do all of my children, so I have 7 children, why do 5 of them have anaphylactic allergies? Why did autoimmune diseases suddenly explode beginning in 1989? I didn't know anybody when I was a kid with diabetes. It was unheard of. Today, juvenile diabetes is epidemic, rheumatoid arthritis, Graves' disease, Crohn's disease, lupus, all of these diseases that suddenly exploded in 1989. Tony Fauci's job is to track the etiology, the pedigrees of those injuries, and figure out what is causing it. It has to be an environmental exposure. We know that genes do not cause epidemics. So what is it? There are only a limited number of things that began in 1989 that had ubiquitous exposures to all the demographics in our country. You know, there are a number of them. There are cell phones, there's PFOA, flame retardants, it's glyphosate, herbicide, neonicotinoid pesticides, and the explosion of the vaccine schedule, which went from the 3 vaccines that I had as a kid to the 72 doses of 16 vaccines that our children have today. So, and by the way, all of those injuries that have become pandemic, there's 175 injuries that are listed by the Institute of Medicine. And all of them are listed also as side effects of vaccines and the manufacturer's inserts of those 72 products. So they have to be regarded as suspects. It's the only cause, or that it's even the principal cause. But you got to look at it and say, this is the potential cause, and we need to seriously study it. We need to have real studies, not fake studies. And let's figure out what's happening to Americans. Why are we so sick? Tony Fauci's job has been to make sure that those studies never occur. And people who try to do those studies, scientists who do them, are marginalized. Their careers are destroyed. And, you know, Tony Fauci is the most powerful scientist in the world. Between him and Bill Gates and Jeremy Farrar, who runs the Wellcome Trust, they can, and Francis Collins, of course, they control 61% of the biomedical research in the world. So they have the capacity to destroy careers, to make careers, to bankrupt universities and research institutions, and to dictate not only what science is done, but also dictate the outcome of scientific studies, which is surprisingly easy to do. And, you know, the other sort of ingredients here are the control of the journals. The journals used to be independent and very, very important institutions for society making decisions about policy decisions based upon what was agreed upon as real science by peer-reviewed committees. And the journals have completely lost that function. They're now just propaganda vehicles for the big pharmaceutical companies. And that also, not entirely Tony Fauci's fault, but he is a person who could have prevented this from happening single-handedly.
Well, Bobby, if he has failed at so much at keeping our health, making the public health as good as it should be or could be, if he has failed so much, how did he end up in this position of so much power?
Well, you can ask the same thing about J. Edgar Hoover. Did J. Edgar Hoover end up as the director of the FBI for 50 years because he was breaking the control of the mafia on American life? No, he denied the mafia existed. That was his solution, just as Tony Fauci denies that the autism epidemic exists. He stopped Jim Crow or racial injustice in the South, all the lynchings. Did J.F. Edgar Hoover ever do anything about that? No. You don't have to be effective at your job to last long as the head of these agencies. In fact, what we know from experience is the worst thing that you can do. The people who actually have stood up to the pharmaceutical companies, people like John Anthony Martin, like Bernice Eddy, like Judy Mikovits, these incredible scientists who were in NIH, who found contamination in medical products or who asked really difficult or inconvenient questions, their careers were destroyed. Their offices, locks were changed. They were relegated to closets that didn't have telephones. And they were marginalized. They were gaslighted, and their careers were destroyed. The people who are surviving in these bureaucracies are oftentimes the exact people who you do not want to be in those bureaucracies because they're corrupt. Tony Fauci has survived because of a kind of, as I show in the book, a complete moral elasticity, a moral vacuum, a willingness to impose extraordinary collateral damage on people, on human beings, particularly children, in order to advance his career and to do things that are not just illegal, but highly unethical, cruel, and barbaric. The experiments on children that I document, where he killed at least 85 children in illegal experiments with the pharmaceutical companies and foster homes in New York. And then we don't even know what he did because he was operating these homes in 6 other states. He was not doing the same thing. He got control of these foster homes where the children were not protected by parents. They were not protected by medical personnel. He turned his pharmaceutical partners loose in them to test these highly, highly toxic chemotherapy drugs on, and to do tolerance testing. He wasn't testing whether they cured AIDS or whether they stopped HIV progression, because many of the children he was experimenting on didn't even have HIV. He was just saying, how much of this drug can they take before it kills them? And 85 of them died. The experiments were completely illegal. And the children did not have guardians, and my researcher, Celia Farber, a brilliant researcher, went up and found the mass grave where Tony Fauci's in Hawthorne, New York, where Tony Fauci's victims, these little tiny little coffins, some of them with 2 or 3 babies in one coffin, were dumped in a pit and concealed by one AstroTurf carpet, which she removed and was able to look in there. But there were literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children in those graves, and we do not know where they came from. And, there was recently an article in the Yonkers Times where the editor of the Yonkers paper said, Robert Kennedy has told this story about all these dead children in the Gates of Heaven Cemetery. And Mr. Murphy, who ran that paper, said, I checked with the Catholic Archdiocese, which runs that graveyard, and they denied it. They said that's not a true story. And so we were able then to push back, and the Catholic Archdiocese backed down, and they asked Yonkers Time. The headline was Robert Kennedy lied about Yonkers Cemetery, and they were forced to remove that article because everything I said in that book is true. And listen, if the things that I say about Anthony Fauci in that book reveal criminal behavior, reveal homicidal behavior, ethical lapses that go beyond legal limits, if any of that is untrue, he should sue me. But he won't, because in our country, truth is a defense to libel. And, you can't defame somebody by telling something that's true and what I've said. The book is 250,000 words, almost 500 pages, 2,200 footnotes, and it's hated by the mainstream media. And yet they have not yet, nobody has identified any of the facts in that book as erroneous.
And because it is a bestseller, even if the Times doesn't want to acknowledge it as so or has barely done so, do you expect, Bobby, a public outcry or somehow for Fauci to be brought before the courts?
Well, I don't know whether he'll be brought before the courts. I think the book is an important contribution because I think the main thing that the book does is it validates these uneasy and bewildering feelings that the general public, that half of Americans have been feeling that something is wrong. And, most people can't believe the stuff that I've written in that book. Because most Americans are idealistic, whether Republican or Democrat, they kind of believe that public officials are working for us and that people make mistakes and that there's occasional dishonesty. But the level of institutional corruption and the level of really kind of murderous, homicidal corruption, it's almost impossible for people to believe that they were seeing Tony Fauci do things that didn't make any sense, ignoring the science on masks, on lockdowns, and being just generally dishonest, confusing data, confusing statistics, cherry picking, and marginalizing and silencing, denying millions of Americans treatments that actually work. And I think most people have not had a narrative that explained why a man would do that, why a trusted public health official who's advised 6 presidents. It's almost impossible for people to believe. But once you read the story and understand it, then I think it all makes sense. And I think the power of the book is that it documents in a really persuasive way, in a bulletproof way, the cause for the uneasiness that people have been feeling. And I think that's probably its most important contribution.
Yes. And putting in black and white, as you said, some of the suspicions or concerns of the public, including, for example, the connection between Fauci and pharmaceutical companies like Moderna. You said that he is personally profiting from the sales of Moderna's COVID vaccine. And this is something I think most people aren't aware of because it seems like there's also kind of a media cover up, right? Doesn't the media just kind of go along with what he says? I feel like they're not shedding light on some of these things.
I would correct you because I never say that he is personally profiting from the Moderna vaccine. What I say is that, which is true, that NIH claims 50% of the patent rights to the mRNA technology in that vaccine, and they have a right to 50%. So his agency has a right to 50% of the royalty profits. In addition to that, he has designated a number of his loyalists, his deputies, as eligible for margin rights on the patents. And what that means is that at least 4 members of his staff, high-level people who are loyal to Tony Fauci, also have now patent claims that will allow them to collect $150,000 a year for life on the sales of Moderna. What's wrong with that? There's many, many things wrong with that. But one of the things is that this is a regulatory agency. It's supposed to be narrowly focused on ensuring that the public is protected. And if you're allowing people in the agency to actually make money on sales, the commercial impulse, it obviously will very quickly subsume the regulatory function. Now, it is true that under HHS rules, Tony Fauci legally can claim patent rights himself, but he has not done that as far as any of us know. There are other drugs that have been marketed through his agency over time where he has patent claims on them and stands to make profits. What he says is one of these, which is an interferon drug, he says that he pledges that when he got caught by Congress, people were shocked. And the AP actually did a story, this is in 2004, that showed that Tony Fauci was pocketing money from the drugs that he was developing at taxpayer expense. And he pledged at that time that from that particular drug, he would donate the proceeds to charity. But because of the subservience of the press, he goes on Jake Tapper twice a week. Jake Tapper has never said, how much do you make and what charity did you give it to? Because as you know, there are charities and there are charities. And, is it a charity when if you take money from a patent like that and you donate it to, let's say, your kid's school or, a university that you want to get your child into or whatever, is that really philanthropy or is it just another form of self-dealing? I'm not saying Tony Fauci is doing that, but I'm saying we should know. And he's never been forthcoming about it. And the servile American press will never ask him those kind of questions.
And is it because what I was implying a moment ago, is it because the media is also captured by the pharmaceutical companies in a way?
Clearly, the media is captured by pharma. We changed the rule in 1997 in this country. Prior to 1997, it was illegal for pharmaceutical companies to do direct-to-consumer advertising on television or anywhere. And it's regarded as a bad idea. And virtually every country in the world makes it illegal, except for us and New Zealand. And not coincidentally, we use more pharmaceutical drugs than anybody, 3 times as much as anybody else. We pay the highest prices and we have the worst health outcomes. So the American Medical Association was dead set against it. Everybody sensible said you should not be allowing these companies to advertise, but the impact has been not just on public health, but it has been subversive and corrosive to our democracy because you have people like Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper who are making these huge salaries, $10 or $12 million a year. And those salaries they're coming from CNN, but they know that the salaries ultimately are paid for by Pfizer and Merck. If you turn on those shows, they announce in the beginning, brought to you by Pfizer. They're not working for us. They're drug reps. They're not doing their job as journalists. They're not confronting Tony Fauci. They're not allowing alternative narratives. They're not allowing criticism or dissent. They become propaganda vehicles for the pharmaceutical industry and for the government. Technocracies are allied with that industry.
Coming up, we explore the mission of gain-of-function research that Fauci funded. And Bobby reveals why he wrote his book and what he most wants the public to understand about Anthony Fauci.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Paleo Valley. Virtually every mushroom product on the market is not really made of mushrooms at all, at least not exactly. Instead, it's just part of the mushroom called mycelium that is grown on grain. And then this entire mycelium and grain combination is included in the product, and what you get is up to 50% starch. These starches can cause gut irritation and interfere with your body's absorption of the little mushrooms that are included in the first place. Paleo Valley Neuro Effect contains a blend of 8 whole mushrooms, so you get the entire mushroom instead of just a piece of it. The product is over 26% beta-glucans, which are the medicinal elements of a mushroom. Many people enjoy coffee for its ability to increase focus and energy by modulating the body's secretion of BDNF, a protein associated with learning and memory. But coffee has negative side effects, as you know, like crashes in the afternoon, stained teeth, dehydration, headaches, addictive properties, and more. This is one reason the Weston A. Price Foundation does not recommend coffee at all. But Paleo Valley was looking for a different way to increase your BDNF, and they added organic coffee fruit to NeuroEffect. And in just 60 minutes, it works 4.3 times better than coffee at boosting your natural production of BDNF. Plus, it contains only 2 milligrams of caffeine, similar to the amount in a single square of chocolate, meaning you get no crash or desire for another cup. Just clean energy without the jitters. So go to paleovalley.com and use the code WISE at checkout for 15% off. Again, that's paleovalley.com and the code WISE for 15% off. And Optimal Carnivore. Organ meats are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. And the folks at Optimal Carnivore believe everyone deserves easy access to them, and they want to take the guesswork and hassle out of eating organ meats. So they started sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand, freeze-drying the organs and encapsulating them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. They chose New Zealand because it is a pure source, a pristine land with rich soil, lush greenery, and one of the cleanest environments on Earth. And they gently freeze-dry the organs to preserve all of the vitamins, minerals, proteins, and enzymes. The products are 100% grass-fed and grass-finished, and free of hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, and GMOs. And Optimal Carnivore knows that our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, so they created this unique blend of 9 different organs. It's their grass-fed organ complex. It's a powerful combination that includes beef liver, brain, thymus, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas, lung, and gallbladder. Each organ contains its own unique benefits and nutritional profile, and it provides a large range of nutrients that supports all of the major organs and glands. It's a real nose-to-tail solution and perfect for people who are traveling or still trying to develop an appreciation for organ meats. Honestly, I have a great diet, but I still take these products to help fill in the gaps. Plus, Optimal Carnivore plants 1 tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. They have a grass-fed organ complex, as I said earlier, a grass-fed bone marrow, and a grass-fed liver product. So go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code WESTON10 to save 10% on all products. Again, that's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code WESTON10. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
Going back to your book, Bobby, one of the most incriminating points you made had to do with Fauci's partnership with the Pentagon to approve taxpayer-funded gain-of-function experiments to breed pandemic superbugs in Wuhan, China, and elsewhere. Can you tell us when this information surfaced and why that hasn't been in the news that much?
It's a long, complicated relationship, but essentially what happened is the intelligence agencies and the Pentagon, we signed a bioweapons agreement in 1972. Nixon signed that forbids the development and the handling and deployment of biological weapons. The Pentagon at that point closed its biological weapons labs like Fort Detrick and other ones. The CIA secretly continued to do bioweapons research illegally, but it was all sub rosa. And then in 2001, 3 weeks after 9/11, we had the anthrax attacks. And all of a sudden, there was a drive within the Pentagon. And the anthrax attacks were used as a pretext for invading Iraq and also for passing the Patriot Act. The people who got the anthrax, the 2 senators who got the anthrax, were Gary Hart and Patrick Leahy, who had been leading the fight against the Patriot Act. And afterwards, they collapsed. And it turned out that after it was too late, we learned from the FBI investigation that the anthrax did not come from Saddam Hussein. It came from one of 3 U.S. military labs. And it created a new biosecurity industry. And the Pentagon was very interested in doing bioweapons development. Under the treaty, you could not do bioweapons development, but you could do dual-use research. And what that means is if you could make the argument that in developing bioweapons, you were developing defenses against bioweapons. And that's what gain of function is, enhancing pathogens supposedly to develop vaccines. which are defense against bioweapons. So it allowed this new industry of gain-of-function studies to occur. And the Pentagon was nervous about it. They thought nobody's going to believe that we're doing vaccine development. They're going to know that we're making weapons. And so they began funneling the money through Tony Fauci. His budget went up by $1.7 billion, and now it's about $2.2 billion a year that is funneled to him to do that kind of research. And that's why he has to keep doing it. He also got a huge salary raise of 68%. That was directly connected to his defense work, Defense Department work. So that's why in 2014, 3 of his bugs escaped. And 300 scientists sent a letter to Obama saying, you got to stop Tony Fauci. He's going to release a pandemic into the world. And Obama passed a moratorium and said, you got to stop. But Fauci cheated. And Obama enjoined or ordered cease and desist orders to 18 studies that Fauci was doing, gain-of-function studies. Fauci waited about a month and restarted 12 of them secretly, illegally. And then he also moved a lot of his operations offshore to the Wuhan lab. He had these strong relationships with the Chinese. He had trained the scientists at Wuhan, and he trusted them. So he started doing these research projects, in Wuhan, where he would be out of reach of the White House and out of sight of a lot of the other scientists who were complaining about him. And he taught the Chinese how to do these techniques. His favorite scientist was Ralph Barrick, who was at the University of North Carolina, who I think received 173 grants from Tony Fauci, mainly to do gain-of-function studies. But Tony Fauci says, well, the reason we were doing this is to prepare for pandemics. And everybody agrees that no useful knowledge has ever come from any of these experiments. But there's a very, very telling group of experiments that, that put the lie to Tony Fauci's claims, because Tony Fauci was not only financing experiments to create these pandemic superbugs, but he was financing the Chinese and Ralph Barrick to develop methods called seamless ligation technique, or hiding the evidence of tampering, so that you could create these bugs and you could conceal the seam that would reveal that this was a human-created germ. And that is the opposite of what you would want to be doing if you were involved in public health. That is just straight weapons development, and there's no other excuse for it.
Wow. Well, I'm letting that sink in a little bit because it's just so alarming. And I can hardly conceive of why a person, an individual like this, in such a position of power and oversight of a regulatory agency that's ostensibly to help the public, what would motivate him to endanger public health really through such research?
Well, like I said, he had a strong economic interest but also just power and control. He had a huge budget that was specifically associated with this kind of bioweapons research. And that's hard to walk away from.
Right. And then I've heard recently, Bobby, I don't know if you've heard this, of studies being done to see if there's a vaccine that could be distributed as if it were a virus.
There's lots of talk of that subject, and particularly because Peter Daszak, had this very odd application that's received a lot of publicity recently, where he was going to take coronaviruses that were laboratory manipulated to make them less lethal, less pathogenic and virulent. And he was going to aerosolize them and then blow these viruses into bat caves to try to inoculate bats with a coronavirus that would be less deadly. It's a wacky, crazy idea. And DARPA turned him down. And it's not something that you would see any I think thoughtful zoologists propose it's really a kind of a mad scientist experiment, but these are the people who are running public health in the United States of America because of Tony Fauci's gestalt.
As we said, your book is, nearly 500 pages, 2,200 citations. It's a lot of information. If you could just put a billboard up, maybe in Times Square, with information on Fauci, just a couple of lines, what would you want to be communicated there?
Well, I think the main thing, it's important for Americans to know, and this is just basic democracy, is what Tony Fauci says is not science. Tony Fauci says, claims that he is science, that they're indistinguishable. Science is dynamic. It's about debate. It's always changing. It's oxymoronic to say that there's a scientific consensus. The last thing that science is what Tony Fauci or CDC says it is. Normally, the way that we try to find what science is, empirical truth, there's methodologies where we go to PubMed and we look at the publications and we read them critically. But any individual who says, I'm an expert, I'm going to tell you what the science says, that person is lying. It's a lie. And it's a devious lie. Because they know better than, listen, I was one of the attorneys on the Monsanto case and hundreds of other cases. And every case that I've fought that has, almost all of them have some kind of scientific controversy. And Monsanto's a really good example. Monsanto came to court with experts from Stanford and from Harvard who came in and told the jury, we are the experts. We know what we're saying, and here's how the science works. And they use graphs, and they used articles, and they used, displays, and tried to explain it to the jury. But then we came in with our scientists who were from UCLA and from Yale, and they said, looking at the same evidence, exactly the opposite. And in the end, the jury believed our scientists. Everybody knows when you go to a doctor, if you don't like what the doctor says, you ask for a second opinion. And we all have the obligation to read science critically. This is part of the obligation of living in a democracy. The appeal to authority is a logical fallacy. Saying, here's what the science says because CDC says it says that doesn't work. CDC is a captured agency. CDC is highly likely, when you hear something from CDC, process by which they arrived at that opinion is oftentimes tainted by corruption. And to live in a democracy, we all have to maintain a posture of skepticism toward government pronouncements. There's a lot of other things I would put on a billboard about Tony Fauci, but I think it's really important for our democracy for people to laugh when they hear somebody say, whether you're sitting on a jet about to take off and the pilot says, put on your mask because CDC says that will protect you. You can put on your mask, and you should do that, because you're going to get thrown off the plane if you don't. Every American needs to be thinking in their head, I don't necessarily believe what CDC says, and I have a job to go beyond that and to not just listen to people who claim they know what's good for me. That story has a bad ending.
Absolutely. Well, I'm thankful that a lot of our listeners are full of that healthy skepticism and questioning science. And after all, that is what science, as you said, is about. It's about being able to question the conclusions that people have come to and to ask questions. It should be debatable. So just one more question before we hit our final one. What do you recommend that citizen on that plane do? What action can we take to turn things around, Bobby? Because it sounds like we're kind of captured by the situation right now.
we're in an era right now, where people are now talking a lot about mass formation hypnosis, that there's a large group of people in our society who are no longer acting rationally. They are not using their brains. They're doing what they're told. They're being manipulated by fear. And that it's really important we start waking people up, or the end of it is a really ugly form of totalitarianism. So people need to question everything. We all need to resist. We need to constantly resist in gentle ways, in peaceful ways. But that means pushing back when people tell you, this is the way that the world works, that, lockdowns are good for, have saved millions of lives. And that, the record that Tony Fauci has the worst record of any health minister in the world. We have the highest body count of any nation in the world. We have 4.2% of the global population and about 20% of the COVID deaths. It's not a good story. It's a very, very bad story. Our death rate in this country following Tony Fauci's prescriptions was 2,500 Americans dead from COVID per million population. The countries that did not do what Tony Fauci said, I'll take one example, Nigeria, which gave everybody essentially ivermectin hydroxychloroquine. Their death rate was 14 people per million. They didn't have a pandemic. They had 1/1500th level of deaths that we had in our country. And people need to start saying, why is that? Why do the states like Uttar Pradesh in India, why does Japan have these tiny death rates, even though it has a very old population? Is it because they're doing the opposite of what Tony Fauci told us to do? People have to start using their brains. And, those of us who are awake and aware need to be constantly pushing our brothers, our sisters, our fellow countrymen away from this totalitarian model and towards some independent thought.
Will do. And so one final question, I always pose this at the end. You may have already answered it in some way, shape, or form, but perhaps you have some new insights. If the listener could just do one thing, Bobby, to improve or shore up their health or take their health into their own hands, what would you recommend that they do?
I would say, let's fight for democracy. I'm not going to start giving health advice. My health advice is don't take health advice from a lawyer.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Take care now.
All right. See ya.
Our guest today was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Visit his website, childrenshealthdefense.org. And I'm Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this podcast, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Awakening from Q-Tip Joe. Wow, I'm obsessed with the content of this podcast. Eye-opening information that has changed my life. My only negative is that I didn't come by this sooner. I'm a mother of 5 who fell prey to the lies of vegetarianism during my children's youngest years. In fact, I never gave them milk and I regularly offered tofu as a healthy alternative to meat. We now do raw milk, plenty of butter, and encapsulated liver on the daily. I am beyond thankful. That's Shayna from Hobart, Washington. Q-Tip Joe, Shayna, we are thankful. Thanks for leaving us this kind review. And you too can rate and review our show. Just go to Apple Podcasts, click on the ratings and reviews, and give us as many stars as you like and tell us what you think of the show. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen or download our Wise Traditions podcast app. All the things. And thank you so much, my friend, for listening. Stay well. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.